Raya sat very still as her father's words cut through the private dining room like a shard of glass. "We've decided to cut you out of the inheritance," he announced, loud enough that the chandeliers seemed to freeze. The music in the background thinned to silence. Faces at the long table turned toward her, polite smiles and satisfied looks. She held her fork halfway to her mouth and listened to the man who had raised her. Around them the entire family filled the room. Aunts in bright scarves, uncles in dark suits, cousins whispering, even her grandmother. The restaurant had an old-world air, white-gloved waiters, a menu with no prices. They had planned this humiliation carefully. Her father, Gideon Brooks, stood at the head of the table, flushed with wine and triumph. "Did you hear me, Raya? We're out. Completely out." Her mother, Marcel, dabbed at her lips with a linen napkin and tried not to laugh. Across the table, Marcus lounged with a smug grin. Lila would not meet Raya's eye. Aunt Doreen cooed the pretense of sympathy. "That's what happens when you turn your back on family." The room erupted in the sound of polite agreement. Glass clinks, a few small laughs, the soft patter of gossip. Someone actually applauded. Raya set her fork down slowly. Hands steady though fury built like a fire under her ribs. Memories blinked through her. Birthdays where Marcus got the bigger present, school plays where Lila got standing ovations, dinners when her achievements were barely noticed. The invitation from her father 3 days earlier had sounded warm. "We'd like you to come, Raya." Very important. She had hoped, foolishly, that maybe they wanted to make amends. Instead, they had built a stage for her shame. "No tears, no begging," her mother said, voice syrupy. Raya picked up her wine glass, an expensive Bordeaux Gideon insisted on, and sipped slowly, letting a hush fall across the table like a curtain. Then she smiled. "Congratulations," she said softly and stood. Her calm was a small theft. It stole their satisfaction. "You're just leaving," Marcus called, stunned. "What else would you like me to do?" she answered pleasantly and walked out. Outside, the Birmingham evening felt cool and honest. Iron lampposts lined the sidewalk, magnolias scenting the air. Raya handed her valet ticket to a young attendant and waited as cars drifted by. Her phone buzzed in her purse. A message from Marcus read, "Don't think you can change Dad's mind later. This is final." She deleted it without reply. Lila's text called her dramatic. She deleted that too. Her car was modest and hers, purchased with her own money from years of steady work. She tipped the valet and slid behind the wheel. As she pulled away in the rearview mirror, the windowed restaurant glowed, full of people who thought they'd won. Raya told herself 2 days. That was all the time she needed. Her calm behind the wheel belied the plan forming like frost, precise, cold, and unstoppable. Home was a tidy 1-bedroom 20 minutes from downtown. Milo, a blunt-nosed tabby, wound himself around Raya's ankles as she unlocked the door. She fed him and poured herself a real, ordinary glass of wine, not the pretentious bottle Gideon had ordered to stage the evening. The city hummed beyond her windows. She had expected a slight turn in her family, a barbed comment, a cold shoulder, but not this ritualized cruelty. For months, small barbs had become routine. Remarks about loyalty, knowing your place, the right way to be grateful. Marcus had been insufferable, coasting on a tech job and loud promises. Lila's online boutique limped on. Gideon liked to bill himself as a builder who taught his children how to stand on their own, except he only ever praised those who needed him most. Raya had built her life alone. That independence had turned into guilt in their eyes. And for Gideon it had become an insult. 3 months earlier, Marcel had asked Raya a favor, a tax question that looked small. Marcel handed over a folder of business papers, trusting Raya to peek and answer. Raya, a forensic accountant at Harbour and Finch, had noticed patterns instantly. Shell companies, odd transfers, invoices that led to empty addresses. She is not just a number cruncher. Raya specializes in asset recovery and fraud detection. Quietly, without drama, she began to gather evidence. She did not think to use it then. She simply wanted to be prepared. Gideon had built a small real estate network through hard work. Or at least that was the story he told everyone. Behind the veneer lay a web of bookkeeping tricks and creative bookkeeping that often crossed into criminal territory. Raya set the files on her kitchen table and began to assemble a careful record. Dates, amounts, names. An insurance folder she titled Clarity. Her phone rang. It was Agnes, her grandmother. Raya almost didn't pick up, thinking of the empty faces at the dinner. Yet she answered. "Raya," Agnes said, voice thin with age and worry. "That was cruel. I should have spoken up." Raya's chest clenched. Part of her wanted to forgive. Agnes had once sneaked her cookies when she was a child, but the silence at the table had been complicity. "Why now?" Raya asked quietly. Agnes sighed. "It's not about what you did. It's about what you didn't do. You didn't need them. You didn't beg." Raya stared at the ceiling. So the truth was out. Gideon feared being irrelevant, so he made sure she would feel irrelevant first. Agnes added carefully. "Gideon's been in trouble for a while, dear. He's been borrowing, hiding things. It's worse than you know." The call changed the light of Raya's plan. The inheritance was partly a fiction. Gideon's theater had a purpose: to hurt her before reality exposed him. Sunday dawned bright and false. Raya spent the night reading bank statements, tracing transfers, mapping owners of shell companies. Milo twined between piles of paper and laptop cords. By noon she messaged Jonah Carr, a journalist she'd worked with on a previous fraud story. Jonah had a taste for corruption stories and a reputation for careful reporting. "Remember that favor?" Type. His reply came in a minute. "Always. Tell me." She laid out the outline. Embezzlement, fake non-profits, partners who lost money. Jonah wanted to meet Tuesday. Raya had 3 days to make sure her evidence was airtight. She felt both the thrill and the weight of acting. For justice, not vengeance. Still, anger hummed under the work. Family had planned a performance of cruelty. She would respond with cold documentation. At Harbor and Finch, Helen, her boss, noticed Raya's carefully controlled tension. "Big case?" Helen asked, placing a coffee on Raya's desk. Raya lied. "Just personal." But Helen was an old manager who read people like ledger sheets. "If you need time, support, resources, say so," she offered. Raya nodded. She spent the day compiling more records. Property deeds showing loans on properties Gideon didn't fully own, invoices routed through 2 shell companies, transfers to anonymous trustees, tax returns that did not match income statements. Each line confirmed what her gut had said. Her father was clever. He had built paperwork that looked convincing at a glance. But paper has edges. With patient inspection, edges reveal the cut. She pulled emails where Gideon coordinated with a partner to shift money, and a non-profits bank showing donations that never reached the intended charity. The story was ugly and true. That evening Marcus called. Raya let it go to voicemail before she answered. "Dad wants to talk," Marcus said when she did finally pick up. "He'll reconsider if you apologize." Raya laughed softly. "Apologize for what?" she asked. "For leaving without making a scene," Marcus said, half accusing, half pleading. "You embarrassed Dad." "I left because I refused to be the spectacle of your cruelty," Raya replied. Marcus's voice tightened. "You don't want to be on the wrong side of this family." "I'm on the right side," Raya said. On her kitchen table, the Clarity folder spread like a map. Each call, each message from Lila and Marcel, pushed and attempted to soften her into a compromise. She felt their pressure. The old trick of shaking their fist while offering the olive branch. She refused it. A few texts later, the family barrage grew, then faded when she ignored it. Her silence was a strategy. She needed it for the next 3 days. Tuesday morning Raya met Jonah at his cluttered office in a converted warehouse. Jonah spread out the documents she had given him and breathed, low and shocked. "This is big," he said, running a hand over pages. He had sources, he said, and contacts in local government. He would verify each document, reach out to business partners listed on the ledgers, and compile independent proof. "Give me 3 days," Jonah said. Raya had waited 29 years. She could wait 3 more. Jonah promised discretion but speed. Raya left his office with a fractal view, relief and dread. If the story ran, Gideon's carefully crafted image would crack. If it didn't, the abuse might continue for years. She returned to her apartment and refined plans. Legal counsel contacts, copies of everything stored in separate drives, backups. Milo hopped onto the laptop bag as if approving. By midweek the waiting ache grew. Raya tried to act normal at work but kept checking her phone for Jonah. At 10 a.m., Helen called her to the office. "Someone calling about you," Helen said, closing the door. A number traced back to Gideon's firm asked if you were available for private consulting. Thin ice slid under Raya's feet. Gideon was checking on her. Helen advised caution. Men in power who felt threatened often lashed out. Raya felt the trap tighten. Later Kevin, Marcus, though she called him Marcus in her head, texted, "Dad wants lunch. Summit Club. Noon." Her instinct screamed trap. Gideon didn't do casual one-on-ones unless he wanted leverage. She called Jonah. His voice was quick and worried. "An anonymous tip hit my editor. Someone says your documents are forged. Be careful." The games had begun. Now Gideon used legal scare tactics to silence truth. Raya considered Jonah's words. He could still run the piece, but the editor needed more verification. His ethics demanded it. That could take a week. Families in positions of power use time as a weapon. They toyed, they threatened, they hoped the target would fold. Jonah suggested a different angle. Go to the lunch. Listen. Gauge Gideon's reaction. Maybe he would bluster and reveal more. Or worse, he would threaten and intimidate. Raya decided she would go. It felt like walking into the lion's den, but she had a plan. She would be measured, she would not show fear, and she would keep her record ready. If Gideon tried to bribe, threaten, or lie, she would note every word. The Summit Club was Gideon's favorite theater of influence. High ceilings, polished wood, windows with city views. He rose as Raya approached and smiled a practiced smile. "Raya, thank you for coming," he said with the old fatherly cadence. She sat, cool, professional, and asked directly, "What do you want?" Gideon tried the olive branch act. "We were hasty," he said. "We want to make it right." Raya's voice stayed calm. "Why now?" she asked. Gideon admitted guilt about the dinner but claimed concern for her. Raya listened as he shifted from apology to anger the way a summer sky flips from sunshine to storm. He accused her of being ungrateful, of trying to destroy him. When Raya asked pointed questions about the business, Gideon bristled. "You don't know what you're talking about," he warned. "You should be careful." Raya answered evenly. "I have documents." Gideon slammed his glass down hard enough that heads turned. He offered money as a solution. "A check," he said, as if currency could buy back 29 years of being invisible. "Name your price," he spat. Raya's reply was calm and simple. She did not want his money. She wanted truth and consequences for the wrongs. He leaned forward and lowered his voice into a threat. "You think you can destroy me? Have lawyers. Have connections. You'll regret this." Raya's face showed only resolve. Gideon tried every angle. Threats, shame, a last attempt to twist their conversation into a private reconciliation. She left the Summit Club with the knowledge that he was scared. Fear makes people reckless. He would move now, against her life, her career, and her reputation. She braced for that. Back in her car, Raya's hands shook. She called Jonah. "Mixed news," Jonah said. His editor wanted to verify with Gideon's side first. The paper would put questions to Gideon and give him 48 hours to respond. Gideon's first move had been rapid. His lawyers called Jonah's editor and threatened a defamation suit. They portrayed Raya as a disgruntled daughter. Jonah remained steady. The evidence spoke. Raya prepared for pushback. That afternoon, An emergency meeting at Harbor and Finch changed the ground beneath her feet again. Partners had been contacted by Gideon's law firm. They accused Raya of corporate espionage and stealing confidential information. Raya sat with her hands folded and told the truth. She had used her personal time and personal computer. The documents had come from her mother and public records. Her colleagues debated liability and loyalty like players trading chess pieces. The firm's partners worried about the headache Gideon's lawyers promised. "You exposed us to risk," one partner said. Raya replied, quiet and meticulous. "This is exactly the kind of fraud we investigate professionally. If anything, we owe victims our help." The partners were torn. Gerald Ellis, in this version, shouted about risk and reputation. Helen stood between the cooling rage and Raya's career. Legally, Raya had not used company resources. But the partners feared courtroom headlines and client fallout. The result was a suspension. Effective immediately, Raya was told not to come to the office. The firm said it was for protection. Raya walked out with her head high, though inside a storm churned. Gideon had moved faster than she expected. He had struck at her job. Raya sat in her car after the meeting, the city glass reflecting a face she barely recognized. Tired, set, and oddly calm. Gideon had begun with theatrics and moved to legal maneuvers. That was a sign of fear and desperation. Jonah called with brisk news. His editor had been pressured by a lawyer, but they wanted to publish as soon as verification came back. Oddly, the editor moved the timeline up. "We'll run it tomorrow morning at 6, Jonah said. "We're not giving him time to bury it." Raya inhaled. That night was a restless one. She called Agnes, and her grandmother voiced care and worry, and then with the clarity of long life, a small blessing. "I'm proud of you." The ache that had lived in Raya for years loosened. At 6 a.m. Jonah's article went live. The headline named Gideon Brooks, listing fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion accusations. Raya sat at her kitchen table with Milo asleep on the newspaper. The story was surgical documents, partner testimony, independent verification. Her phone exploded. Dozens of calls, hundreds of messages. Marcus called repeatedly, demanding retraction. Lila's texts accused her of destroying the family. Marcel's voice called betrayal over and over. Most messages were rage and disappointment. A few asked for proof and a handful expressed sorrow. The Tribune's story peeled back Gideon's glossy public face and showed the rot beneath. Within the hour, reporters crowded near Gideon's office. Local television called. The city buzz rose like a swarm. Kevin, Marcus, came to her door that morning, red-faced and furious. He pounded on the wood, demanding explanations and retractions. Raya answered through the door and told him simply the truth. She had documented fraud. Marcus shouted that family secret-keeping mattered more than public justice. Raya heard Lila pleading for compromise, for a public apology that would smooth everything. "Tell Dad you were mistaken," she urged. Raya's voice hardened. "I won't retract the truth to preserve an illusion." Marcus kicked the door before they left, an act of fury that left a scuff. Their departure felt like finality. The family would circle the wagons. Trust broke like dry ice. Raya realized then she had already burned the bridge. That evening more victims called Jonah and the newspaper. More people in their town began to whisper. Gideon's carefully cultivated respect crumbled. At Harbor and Finch, the partners reconvened. Evidence proved genuine. Helen called and told Raya the suspension would be lifted. The partners wanted to reinstate her. "You did what's right," Helen said quietly. "It's what we stand for." Relief washed through Raya like a cool tide. But relief was small and brittle. Her father's response escalated. His lawyers aimed at her career. Gideon told anyone who would listen that she was lying and unstable. He framed himself as the victim. The family group chat she had remained in exploded with calls to loyalty. But public opinion shifted too. The Tribune's piece sparked other victims to speak. A non-profit director came forward, confirming missed funds. A former business partner described losses. The dominoes had begun to fall. Gideon called Raya that same morning in a voice stripped of bravado. He sounded beaten. He begged her to call Jonah and claim a mistake, to say she had misread documents in the heat of anger. "We can make it go away," he pleaded. Raya heard genuine fear. A man who had ruled by intimidation was now cornered. She refused. She had one conversation of warning in return. "Don't expect mercy from me." The call ended on a cold note. Later that afternoon, the state attorney general announced a preliminary inquiry. Federal investigators looked into possible tax crimes. Gideon's assets were examined. The town watched as a man who had been a pillar began to wobble. Raya felt hollow and vindicated at once. Justice felt like a machine grinding forward. It would not be swift, but it would be thorough. Media swarmed her building. Camera vans lined the curb. Reporters knocked and asked for interviews. She refused. That afternoon Helen called with news. The firm would not only reinstate her but likely take on some of Gideon's victims as clients. She had done the work, she had the expertise. Clients began to call, desperate for help. Raya met with the first of them the next day. Thomas, who had poured retirement money into a phantom development. Jennifer, whose non-profit banked on Gideon's promises, told her story. Robert and Claire, partners deceived for a decade, produced invoices showing missing funds. Each meeting added a face to the ledger and strengthened the case. Gideon had used trust as a cloak for theft. The legal storm intensified. Gideon's team filed motions to freeze investigations, and his allies offered public denials. Some neighbors took Gideon's side. Others felt betrayed and shocked. By the week's end, 2 business partners filed criminal complaints. The state attorney general confirmed a formal probe. Within a month, Gideon was arrested and led away in handcuffs. Raya stared at the live footage from her office, feeling little outward emotion. No victory dance, no glee. She felt an empty, steady relief. The release that comes when a long pressure finally vents. After the arrest, messages flooded in from the family. Anger, accusations, and pleas. Marcus and Lila blamed her outright. Marcel accused her of destroying her father. The old alliances had turned brittle. One message that mattered came from Agnes. "He made his choices. You made yours. I'm proud of you." Those words were small armor. Raya allowed herself to grieve that night. Long, quiet tears for a childhood that had wanted approval, for broken family ties, for the loneliness this path demanded. Milo purred beside her and seemed to understand that something vast and irrevocable had passed. In the days that followed, Raya began to shift from the center of a reckoning to the center of rebuilding. The victims she now helped thanked her eloquently, sometimes with letters, sometimes with dinner invitations born of gratitude. In the office, the partners placed a careful hand on her career. A promotion was murmured. Professionally, she would not be undone. 3 months later, the trial began. The charges multiplied. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Raya sat through hearings and found the courtroom strange. A room where truth wore a judge's robe and evidence whispered louder than speeches. The prosecution called her as a witness. On the stand she described the discovery, the documents, the patterns. Gideon's lawyer tried to reduce her to motive. Anger, revenge, family drama. Raya answered each question with facts, documents, and calm. "You were angry," the defense said. "You were motivated by revenge." Raya replied, "I was motivated by the truth. The documents say what they say whether I am angry or not." Her voice carried. The jury listened. When she stepped down, she felt Gideon look toward her one time. And in that moment he looked suddenly small. Witness by witness, invoice by invoice, the prosecution laid out the map of Gideon's deception. Former partners testified. Non-profit directors recounted donations that never arrived. Bank statements tracked phantom expenses. The world that had once applauded him saw the scaffolding fall away. The jury deliberated. Outside, reporters awaited. Raya kept doing her work, answering lawyers' questions, meeting with victims, and moving forward with the civil suits Harbour and Finch planned to file on behalf of clients. The firm recognized the case's weight and committed to seeing victims receive restitution if possible. The burden of family collapse remained private and raw. Raya heard Marcus's name called in the press when others traced his involvement in managing certain accounts, but her focus stayed on proof and victims. After 6 weeks in court and 2 days of jury deliberation, the verdict came: guilty on all counts. Raya read the headline at work, and a legal team member hugged her in the hallway. The prosecutor spoke to the cameras. Justice served, victims vindicated. Gideon's shoulders sagged at the podium. Sentencing followed 3 weeks later. Victims lined up to give statements about lives ruined. Thomas's retirement gone, Jennifer's non-profit near closure, Robert and Claire's business devastated. Raya stood to speak at sentencing, not as a victim but as a person who had once sought only her father's love and approval. She told the court how years of striving for that love had pushed her to investigate when she saw the truth. She explained how being overlooked had taught her to find strength. The judge listened and then delivered a sentence that echoed the scale of the crimes: years of imprisonment and restitution to victims. Gideon's face crumpled. Marcel wept in the gallery. Marcus and Lila looked stunned in the back. Raya felt a complicated hush inside: relief, exhaustion, and a strange private sorrow. In the months after, family life unraveled further. Marcel filed for divorce to salvage what she could. Marcus lost his job when association with the scandal threatened his employment. Lila's boutique collapsed under mounting debt and reputational ruin. The Brooks family name, once a town banner, became a cautionary tale. Raya, in contrast, rebuilt. She accepted a promotion at Harbour and Finch and moved into a larger apartment with wide windows. She allowed herself small comforts and more predictable sleep. Letters came from victims and families expressing gratitude and relief. Some invited her to dinners where simple thanks was the main dish. Harbour and Finch gave her responsibilities that matched her expertise: leading investigations, mentoring younger forensic accountants, and consulting on civil litigation. Her promotion brought more money and also more respect. She cut ties with relatives who tried to contact her with pleas and gaslighting. Some tried to bridge back with apology. Raya met a few with a polite distance and recognized how some bridges should remain burned. Her grandmother remained the steady shore. They met monthly for tea, and those afternoons became a safe place to share small stories, to laugh, and to remember that not all family is cruelty. Over time, Raya rebuilt a life textured by work and honest friendships. She dated lightly, but the trust work had been complex. She prioritized stability and honesty. The promotion at Harbour and Finch made it easier to travel occasionally and to invest in the things she'd postponed: a better bed, an art print she loved, time for Milo to enjoy a bigger sunny window perch. Professionally, she became a quiet figure of principle: meticulous, fair, and fierce in pursuit of victims' redress. She taught junior team members how to follow paper trails, how to listen to clients whose losses felt more like grief than numbers. She learned that her strength wasn't only in exposing fraud, it was in staying humane throughout the exposure. Months passed. Some relatives tried to reach out, apologies that smelled like last-minute attempts to reclaim dignity. Raya responded sparingly. She had learned boundaries. Her mother sent notes through Agnes complaining about hardships. Raya felt a small, cold shake at the memory of Marcel's hands smoothing the linen napkin while the family shouted at her in the dining room. In time she noticed how hard it was for some people to hold two truths: that someone can both be a parent and also a perpetrator. The community's attitude shifted. Many who had admired Gideon privately admitted doubt. Others defended him to the end. For Raya, the arc of justice had not filled the hole that family betrayal left, but it allowed her to live without their silent contempt. Work grew busy as more victims sought representation. Raya took on portfolios, dug into forensic audits, and developed a reputation for careful tenacity. She and Jonah remained in touch professionally. He had kept a firm journalistic integrity, and their collaboration helped many cases reach public light. The court's restitution orders moved slowly, and some victims saw money return in degrees. Legal systems are patient machines. Progress came stuttering and slow. Raya accepted this pace, learning patience where before she had wanted swift retribution. She found meaning in small victories. A client able to pay bills again, a non-profit that could reopen with recovered funds, a partner who felt vindicated after years of threat. 1 year after the article that changed everything, Jonah invited Raya to an anniversary feature about whistleblowers who had reshaped their towns. She agreed, not for fame but to speak for others who had no voice. The piece was measured and respectful. It painted a picture of a woman who had chosen truth over comfort, and it examined the cost of that choice. People reached out with messages, some hateful, some grateful, and some simply curious about how someone stands up to family. Raya answered as honestly as she could. It was lonely. It was necessary. She would do it again. The feature reminded her that story matters. How one person's courage can ripple into systemic accountability. Courthouse doors creaked as appeals and civil suits wound forward. Gideon's bankruptcy filings tried to shift assets and scramble restitution. Lawyers for victims worked to trace hidden holdings. The firm supported these efforts. Raya oversaw accounts and coordinated with prosecutors. Sometimes the work exhausted her. Other times each new traced transfer felt like a small light flicking on in a dark room. Outside work, Raya's social circle included colleagues and new friends, people who did not expect family drama to define her. In the quiet hours she practiced small rituals. Friday walks by the river, a favorite tea at Agnes's kitchen table, the lazy sun in Milo's favorite window spot. Marcus attempted reconciliation more than once, offering apologies that shifted between real hurt and defensive blame. Raya listened to his first attempts and kept her distance. When he asked for work recommendations months later, she politely declined. She offered to point him to job search resources instead. Lila's attempts were similar. Small pleas for forgiveness that often turned into demands for help. Raya learned to guard her hard-won peace. Sometimes the cost of justice is giving up the illusion of family as a safe space. Raya accepted that and chose new anchors. Friends, colleagues, and Agnes. People who offered kindness without expectation. The trial and sentencing became town history and then case law for local universities teaching forensic accounting and ethics. Raya was invited to give a guest lecture for accounting students, speaking about the human side of numbers. She described the slow reading of ledgers, the importance of patience, and the moral weight of whistleblowing. She encouraged students to anchor their work in truth and empathy. After the lecture, a handful of students thanked her privately for showing a path where integrity and career could align. It felt healing to turn painful experience into a tool to educate others. Raya began to see the broader effect of her work. Fewer chances for predators to hide in plain sight. In private moments, Raya remembered her father differently. Not as only a villain, but as a flawed man shaped by his own fears and need for status. That didn't excuse the harm. Simply complicated the memory. She sometimes thought of the little girl who had wanted approval from a man who never could give it. Now the woman who remained stood independent and steady. She kept letters from victims and small tokens of gratitude in a shoebox on her shelf. Occasionally she read them when nights felt heavy and found warmth in the reminder that her work mattered beyond family spite. Years later, Gideon served his sentence. The legal consequences had been severe. Prison years, restitution obligations, and a destroyed reputation. The Brooks name no longer carried the old weight. Marcel's divorce closed a chapter, and Marcus and Lila rebuilt in smaller, humbler ways. Some members of the extended family drifted away entirely, others mended brittle ties with private apologies that were too late. Raya did not relish their downfall. She accepted the necessary justice. Life moved forward, steadier, with fewer betrayals and more clarity. She found routines that nourished her. Honest work, quiet evenings, visits with Agnes, and the companionship of Milo. Raya's career flourished in a measured way. Her promotion became a platform to mentor and change how companies approach fraud prevention. She helped craft policies, train teams, and advised nonprofits on better governance. The victory was not theatrical. It was practical. She watched as new victims found restitution, and as other would-be fraudsters found less room to operate in the community she loved. People who had once thought she was cold or unlikable now recognized the courage it takes to speak up. She made peace with some relatives and drew careful boundaries with others. Her life centered on a new truth. Value yourself first, then build outward. On an autumn evening a year to the day after Jonah's article, Raya stood by her tall windows and looked at the city skyline. Milo slept at her feet, content. Her phone buzzed with messages of congratulations for the anniversary dinner she had agreed to attend, a small gathering of victims, allies and friends. She thought of the long journey, the humiliation at that private dinner, the long months of evidence gathering, the courtroom, the lonely nights, and finally the quiet liberation. She had paid a high price for truth, but the cost had bought something priceless: freedom to build a life on her own terms. The lessons Gideon taught, ruthlessness and stealth, she had turned into tools for justice, used not to wound but to protect. In the end, she understood that some revenge is not about destruction. It is about liberation. She smiled and typed a short reply to Jonah. "See you tonight." Then she closed her laptop, filled a small bowl for Milo, and went to get ready.